Started, we'll call to order the Committee of the Whole for the City Council of Highland Park, Illinois. It is October 28th, 2024. Will the clerk call the roll, please?
Councilmember Bruffin. Here. Councilmember Ross. Here. Councilmember Tapia.
Here.
Councilmember Littleworth.
Here.
Councilmember Stone. Here. Councilmember Bloomberg.
Here.
Mayor Rodring, here. We have a quorum.
Sorry.
No worries, we're good. We have a motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole, which was held October 15, 2024.
So moved. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Excellent, thank you. We have two items that we're talking about this evening. Thank you to the members of the public who have joined us. I just want to let you know, we appreciate you joining us for this, what I know will be interesting conversation. We do not, however, have comments from the public. This is an opportunity for the council to have policy conversations in a little less formal way. So we appreciate you coming and your interest, and I will now turn it over to Gita Newkirk.
Great, thank you, Mayor. So the first item on the Committee of the Whole agenda this evening is a policy consideration pertaining to the possible relocation of the Miss Nitro sculpture, which is currently located off of St. John's, just north of us. I do want to recognize Amanda Bennett. She's our communications manager. After this introductory slide, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to go through the PowerPoint, and then again, we are seeking your policy consideration on a number of matters pertaining to this topic. We do have a number of members this evening that are representing the Cultural Arts Advisory Group, which is a advisory group representing the city. So I want to recognize Dr. Jerry Eisenberg, who is the chair. So Mayor, with your permission, Dr. Eisenberg does have a couple of comments as part of our presentation, just to give some further context of the discussion that CAG had as part of this consideration. And then also just want to recognize other members of the Cultural Arts Advisory Group. We have the Vice Chair, Sylvia Rhoda, Joanne Bernstein, and Amy Bruno. So we have advised the Cultural Arts Advisory Group of the Open Meetings Act, and it's not a posted meeting of the Cultural Arts Advisory Group. So in light of the number of individuals that are here with us this evening, only one would be able to speak, again, if at the discretion of Mayor Rodering, of course. So the consideration for possibly relocating Miss Nitro came about as part of the library expansion project. So the library has filed an application. They are going to be proceeding through the city's public planning process for renovation as well as a possible expansion. That proposed expansion is recommended to go west onto the subject property. And if it is approved, then it would impact the location of this sculpture. So we're not here this evening to talk about the library expansion project, but should it go through the process, it is eventually going to come before the mayor and city council for formal consideration, and then subject to the approval of the expansion project, the relocation of the sculpture would follow thereafter. If anyone watching this is interested in being on the notification list for the library expansion project, they're going to meet before the Plan and Design Commission in November. And the library has a project interest email group where they are letting anyone interested know about the various public meetings that will be held as part of that project. You're going to see some sites for consideration and that were reviewed by the Cultural Arts Advisory Group that are not owned by the city. In fact, they're owned by the Park District of Highland Park. We received their preliminary approval to consider those sites to house Miss Nitro. But what we are looking for your consideration this evening is your preferred location or locations for that sculpture. So if one or two of those sites are owned by the Park District, what we would do thereafter is work more closely with the Park District to come up with an agreement to house the sculpture. So I do want to say the preferred location that we're going to show you is Brown Park in the Ravinia District. The Park District has indicated, based on a very preliminary high-level overview, that they would prefer to see a different site for the sculpture. They are undertaking a planning process, possibly to activate that park property, and so they have just started that process. But again, if this site is preferred by the City Council, what we will do is work with them And, I feel comfortable that we could come up with a mutually beneficial plan that would accommodate any activation on their property as well as housing the city's sculpture. Another location for consideration is the Preserve at 1201 Park Avenue. It's home to the Senior Center and also the Rec Center. That location, based on a very preliminary overview, that location is owned by the Park District, and what they've said is the sculpture and how it's designed just really doesn't fit into the ambiance of the Preserve. So just want to toss out those two preliminary comments made by the Park District, but Amanda's going to walk through those sites in further detail. Also just wanted to highlight that any aspect of relocation is not currently in the city's budget. We did include some very preliminary numbers in the staff report. And again, after your policy feedback this evening, what we will do is go back and get formal cost estimates. So we'll have a firm number for restoration as well as relocation when that time comes. And with that, I will turn it over to Amanda.
Wonderful, thank you.
All right, thank you, Gita. And again, I just want to echo Gita's comments and thank the members of the Cultural Arts Advisory Group for joining us this evening. They had a number of really engaged, thorough, thoughtful discussions on this topic throughout the summer, starting in June, and we even revisited a little bit at our meeting just a couple weeks ago. So this is a matter that they took really seriously and approached with a lot of care and consideration, both for how the sculpture is currently cited by the library and what it could be if we are in a position where it needs to be relocated. So with that, as Gita said, we are seeking your feedback this evening on two policy questions because these are kind of key to developing that firmed up budget, because right now we have what we're calling a high estimate that incorporates, that allows for so many unknowns, it's really not workable or helpful to us. So with your feedback, we'll be able to seek out specific quotes and give you a much better idea of what this will cost. So those two policy questions are, which surface treatment should the city pursue during the conservation of this work? And the location site option considerations, as Gita discussed. So I think we're going to tackle the surface treatment first, and then we'll move on to location. So just so we're all on the same page about Miss Nitro, I'm sure you are all familiar with her and her iconic place outside the west side of the library. The sculpture was installed in 1973. It was funded in part through resident fundraising and an NEA grant. We did find out this, I think this is kind of the historic measurement that we've used, this 70 feet long, although as I said to Councilmember Ross, it actually is about 50 feet long, which is more in line with what Councilmember Ross Somewhere in there, yeah. So just so you're aware, I know everyone is familiar with the work, but it is composed of large industrial bronze piping that comes together in different sections. So if you look the next time you're out and about over there, if you look at some of the joints, you'll be able to see those hexagon head bolts that piece the sculpture together. Those pipes are all hollow, they're not solid. That central element is fabricated also bronze. Its original look is a little bit different than how it appears now, or how you might remember it from when it was repainted in the 90s. So originally it had a burnt oil patina, which is no longer a recommended finish. It isn't a patina we would be able to recreate, but we could get close to it with different finishes now. But it would have given it, back in the 70s when it was installed, kind of a really rich black finish that played a little bit more with the light, had more depth to it than what we're accustomed to seeing now. I will say though, you probably all remember this and I don't, because I wasn't here, but when this sculpture was repainted, it was a high gloss paint. So what you're seeing now is very, very matte because it's got like 30 years worth of dirt and grass clippings and wear and tear on it. So it was a high gloss paint. I don't think it looks that way now. So just briefly, some initial comments from the conservation firm that looked at the current condition of the work. So as you were probably unsurprised to hear, there are a number of surface scratches and losses due to lawn maintenance. So the sculpture's current location on the lawn really leaves it open to inadvertent damage from the crews that are maintaining the lawn. Accidental, you really can't avoid it because it's situated on the lawn. We've noticed some heavy corrosion in jack rusting and connection points. One thing that's interesting to me is that when the sculptures were previously assessed in 2002, there was no evidence of corrosion. Now there is. So I'm really glad that we're having this conversation because we are seeing some deterioration of the surface, at least from when the last assessment was completed. There's some incised graffiti on the sculpture. I have been told it's nothing offensive. There's a lot of dirt buildup. And that's what we know. That's what we can see from looking at the sculpture the way that it is put together right now. What we don't know is if there's any underlying surface issues that we need the paint removed in order to see, or anything that might come up when the sculpture is disassembled. Depending on the type of treatment that you select, if you decide to repaint it, for example, we might take a closer look at it and decide just to repaint it and not disassemble it. If we disassemble it, we'll have a better idea of the actual condition of those pipes. I'm just throwing that out there. Whether Ms. Nitro remains at the library or is relocated, we do still need to plan for approximately $40,000 of conservation costs for this sculpture, which is not terribly surprising to me when I did find that former conservation report. In 2002, it was quoted at $24,000. So to me, 20 plus years ago, additional wear and tear.
Was that work done? in
No.
2002?
So in our staff report, we have a current working figure of $750,000 as a high estimate, inclusive of all the items that you see on the screen. You will probably already note that most of them say, if needed, depends on this decision. We don't know this. Our goal, based on tonight's policy feedback, is to be able to walk that number back to something that is realistic relative to your guidance for the conservation and ultimate siting of the so if you look at that figure, I will take storage on its own. If we were to store a work of this size in a warehouse where it can be looked after for a year, you'll probably remember from our discussion about the lot, we'd be looking at something like $100,000 in storage costs alone. So I think that we can definitely work this number back, but we need your policy feedback to do that. So what are those outstanding issues? I think there are 5 of them that really impact that total number, whatever it winds up being. The first is the surface treatment, because once we know the surface treatment, then we're going to be able to answer questions like, how many phases will this take? What are the costs associated with that particular treatment? When we know this location and site preparation, then we'll be able to consider things like, what does it look like in its new home? Or what does it look like if it stays where it is and we want to choose a siting that is more conducive to the long-term health of the sculpture? If you were to do hardscape or landscape, for example. Those are lots of unknowns that we just can't account for yet without your feedback. Storage, maybe we need storage. Maybe we don't need to store it. What needs to happen at the library in order to restore that back into pure lawn? I don't know. I don't know how deep that concrete goes. And then, of course, the conservation costs associated with reinstallation, if it doesn't move. So with that, we have 2 surface treatment options broadly. The first is to consider repainting the work. If we were to repaint it, it would look more similar to what everyone recognizes as the sculpture now, but just keep in mind that wasn't the way that the sculpture looked when it was installed. I think that within the art history world, I do have a background in art history from Northwestern, there's something to be said for the original intent of the work, which would be a patina on the sculpture, and there's also something to be said for the artist's last statement on the work, which in this case, because Peter Volkos was consulted in the painting process, would be to paint it. I think you could make an argument either way. From my perspective, I know that the artist truly expressed a preference for the patina, and I would love to see a black patina restored to it. But that's just me, and I'm not supposed to wait. Either way, whatever you choose, there will still be annual maintenance associated with this refinishing. If it's painting, we know that'll be approximately $2,000 per year. For the repatination, it does depend on the process that we choose. If you decide to go that route, then what we'll do is look at what those different patination options look like. because there's lots of different ways to go about creating that black patina. As I said, the repainting was approved by Peter Vokos in 1991, so that is technically his last word on it, but I do think you could easily make an argument for restoring the original appearance of the work. So before we weigh in it, are you all familiar with what a black patina would look like and how it's different from what we see now? Or do you want to see some examples?
So I actually have a photo that I took last week of another sculpture by the same person that
Oh.
does have the original patina, I believe,
Oh,
on
yeah,
it. And I can forward it
I would love it
to
if you
Ashley
did,
if you
yeah.
can put it up. You want me to, Ashley, can I email it to you? Are you able to?
Guido signed in on this computer, so you need to email it to me.
Thanks.
Yeah, unfortunately, because we did paint over it before, we can't use the same burnt oil technique that Peter Vokos used on this and many others of his work, but we can approximate it with,
It's gonna come from my personal email account, sorry. Just easier.
And do you have estimates for how much that type of work, kind of different types?
no, there's different ways to go about it, so if you did express a preference for that, we could obtain those quotes. I think regardless, we are gonna need to bid this project just based on that initial estimate of $40,000 for the conservation work. So we would need to go out to bid for this piece of our collection specifically.
I just find it difficult to, I mean, if it's about the same cost to do it either way, it's one thing if it's $150,000 to do it one way and $150,000 less to do it the other way. That's important. And so, I mean, I'd love to see them, but I don't see how we can, in a vacuum, judge
I think the
that.
question more for me was, are you interested in exploring the repatination route? And I'll tell you why. Because if we go that route, we do have to deinstall the sculpture. So even hypothetically, let's say the library project doesn't move forward. If you decide to go the repatination route, we need to bring in all the associated costs that would be
For disassembly.
For disassembly. So we'd
And
still need the
reassemble.
crane. We'd still need to reassemble it even if it's on site. We'd need to take all the paint off. Whereas if we were gonna repaint it, if you are all are not willing to consider the repatination, if we were to repaint it, we could just repaint it. We could complete restoration on the work where it is the way it is and repaint it.
And if it's moved, does it have to be disassembled?
Yes, if it's moved, it does have to be disassembled. So, I don't know if that has bearing on your.
Kim?
Yeah, I don't get how it was painted to begin with. My understanding is this is a really, there's the photo.
Yeah.
This is a really valuable sculpture. This is a famous artist. How it got, I mean, when it got painted, I was sort of shocked. It is, I don't know if you can tell from this image, but it is a completely different look when it has the patina on it. And I think it's worth quite a bit, and I wonder if we might be able to get some grants to help restore it or something. It's likely to be moved, so it's gotta be disassembled anyway, so I have a strong preference. I mean, we obviously have to know what the costs are gonna be, but I think it's
And we
worth
could
investing in
definitely-
this.
Yeah, if there's interest in pursuing it, we can definitely see what those options would be. I think just the key figure there is that so let's say the library project doesn't proceed and we decide to move forward with repatination, we would still need to pay all of the associated costs related to disassembling and reassembling. That's
Yeah, so this picture, this is in San Francisco, right near the city hall, so it's on government property. They may have an idea of what the maintenance costs are per year.
Okay,
That might be helpful.
thank you,
for
that's
us.
really helpful. And
Actually, since you did that research,
Yeah.
it seems to be sitting on the lot.
Right,
It is, you know,
It's not
Yeah.
on concrete
Yeah.
or.
Again, right?
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I don't know, we could probably benchmark them, right? And see, is it working on the
well,
lot? like
but they don't have snow.
Well,
But they are still mowing the lawn.
But they're still
that? Yeah,
mowing
there's
the lawn,
one
yeah.
on, yeah.
and plowing.
Joanne, I'm gonna ask you to hold on for just a second, because I want Amanda to be able to finish her presentation, if that's okay. Thank you.
Only Jerry can speak.
And only Jerry can speak, because of,
I understand, but.
no, but that means you
I can add
cannot.
some information to what Amanda
I'm still
said.
gonna ask you to send him a note if that's what you need to do, but we don't have a meeting called for the Cultural Arts Advisory Group, and so we'll be in breach of the Open Meetings Act if we have people speaking on behalf of the subject matter. Amanda, if you could continue, that'd be
Yes,
great. Thank you.
and I just, to Councilmember Stone's question about why was the sculpture painted in the first place, maintaining maintaining the black oil patina was very expensive, and it's difficult, it's a difficult treatment. And so the city approached the vocal studio and said, we need something that is more cost efficient and that could protect the sculpture from long-term wear. They did note that our climate is an issue. So the thought was that not only would the black paint coating replace some of those extra costs of maintaining the patina, but it would also be a more protective surface in the event that, just based on our weather.
I think it's important for context that Dan Pierce was the mayor in 1991, and he was also the mayor in 2002, and his wife is, very involved with the Illinois Council on the Arts. So, that those decisions were being made under his leadership, I think that's important context to have.
Yeah, and like I said, I think you can.
I'm gonna ask you one more time, please, to not call out. Thanks so much.
And like I said, I think you can make an argument for both the original intent of the work and also the artist's last statement on the work. So I think either way, we could present a cogent story. for
We're
how it
talking about an
works.
artist who hated this community and called it after a stripper that he saw, so
Right.
I think that's all part and parcel of this conversation.
And Mayor, to your point, so what you're saying, because one would argue, and I hate to cast aspersions, but that black is just so ugly relative to this beautiful patina. But it was done under the leadership of someone who had an arts eye and background, and I'd love to know the reasoning. I don't know if there's a way to find out.
There are probably minutes somewhere in the
Because
archives.
is this a sculpture that children can play on or jump on?
Well,
Because that
they
was my
are.
understanding.
They are.
And if that's the case, how does the finish of it affect the ability of, does children jumping on it change that?
Right. Tony?
Experientially, anecdotally, children did play on it when it had a patina on it. I was in the community when this sculpture was installed. I can't say I'm terribly fond of it, but that aside, it is an important work. It looks significantly different and I think better with the original patina on it. I think the fact that the artist approved an alternate coating in consideration of whatever community financial limitations were expressed was not, I don't think should be taken as the artist's preference or assent, but merely his limited cooperation under the circumstances. The original expression of the artist was with the patina on it, and I think it looks more organic in that fashion. I think children will still be able to play on it, but it's gonna have maintenance costs that are
Ongoing.
that are unique to that kind of finish.
I think the difference in the cost though is so material, right? And when we say it might cost more, how much more as we weigh the pros and cons? Is that like twofold, threefold, tenfold, Amanda?
So, it would depend on what approach they took. She explained that there are multiple ways that they could do that restoration. So the painting was much more straightforward. That's how we have that $2,000 a year figure. But we could find out. She said she thought it would be roughly in the same ballpark. But we are not currently budgeted for like any maintenance. Yeah, we're not budgeted for any maintenance of these works. So, like any of the works of our collection. And this particular piece has not had any conservation since 1991. So,
Let's continue with the presentation and then we'll come to questions, if that's
There's
okay.
just one question with the maintenance budget or lack thereof. Since that was just-
Right, I mean, I think it's.
Councilmember Taka asked about ongoing maintenance costs and, did I have an idea of how much it would be? And it really depends on
No,
the.
that's not, my
So
question
there,
is, you're saying
I
there's
think
no
that's-
budget for
I think that
maintenance?
is the last bullet point,
Okay.
is budget, and I think that's an important part of the conversation.
Because I thought there was a cultural arts fund that had maintenance money.
No, there
in it.
used to be a public art
Yeah,
budget, but then we celebrated the sesquicentennial, and I think we
Mhm.
spent
We
all
used
that
it.
money on the arch so,
Okay.
yeah.
But just as a brief aside, so one thing that we did do this year that was on our major projects work plan was we contracted with a consultant to provide a conditions assessment of our existing works because we haven't done any maintenance, so that we could begin with next fiscal year planning for those capital improvements. We asked them to prioritize the works and help us understand where they needed, what needed the most immediate work, and then to get us on a maintenance cycle. So
So-
we could plan for that.
So it's maintenance, and then it's also, do we wanna, I mean, this is a whole not related question to
Yeah.
this conversation, but do we wanna now move back to having a public art fund for the purposes of continuing to purchase and acquire art? But that's a different day's conversation. I'll let you continue with
So-
the location.
So those are my thoughts on the finish for the work. But as far as location, like I said, we owe a great debt to our CAG advisors who really dedicated multiple meetings to this topic. And ultimately, their discussions were framed around a key policy question that I think our chair summed up very nicely in our last meeting, which was, do we see this artwork as a destination piece, or do we see it as a gateway? Is it the kind of work where we want people to come to it and visit it and enjoy it? Or do we think it's something that's iconic and defines Highland Park, and maybe the aspects of a site that would facilitate that destination component don't matter as much? So to that end, they discussed a multitude of sites at their first meeting, and thank you to Assistant City Manager Erin Jason who facilitated that first one. They narrowed it down to 6, which were discussed in depth in July. And then there are 3 that were discussed by CAG and are included in the staff report and in tonight's presentation, as well as a 4th site that was suggested by a council member. So the 3 that we're talking about tonight are Brown Park, the triangle property north of the intersection of Central Avenue and Deerfield Road, and the Preserve. So Brown Park did receive the unanimous recommendation of CAG if the sculpture does need to be relocated. So I do want to emphasize this is all hypothetical for several reasons. The first was that there is significant foot traffic in the Ravinia District, and it aligns with the Ravinia District's identity as one of our arts destinations. I think it is worth noting that we don't have a significant piece of public art in the Ravinia District. We do have some lovely mosaics, but we don't have
The horse sculpture.
yeah, that's true. And there's also the fountain in the park. But we don't have this is one of the, this is the most significant piece in our public art collection. So, it has a prominent location, and a potential to be a destination because it has easy access. So there's ample parking surrounding it. It encourages visits from families because they go to food trucks and other events in the district. And then it also offers unobstructed views and clear sight lines of the work. So we're not competing with anything else in that particular parcel. As far as Central Avenue and Deerfield Road, Arbor Terrace of Highland Park has very kindly indicated interest in making the space available to the city for this purpose if we would like. So CAG discussed at length numerous advantages and disadvantages to this property. Noting that it's extremely visible because there's so much traffic at that intersection. But because there's so much vehicular traffic, lack of parking in the vicinity, and distance from the core business district, it was ultimately not recommended. The preserve was also thoroughly discussed, and again, CAG thought that there were several advantages to this space. It's close to the recreation center and the senior center, which, as we all know, do have their own destination traffic. It's a beautiful natural setting that perhaps the Park District would be interested in working with us to start incorporating public art in the space, or more of it. Lots and lots of parking. But ultimately, CAG recommended against the preserve because it's not centrally located. It does have a designated focus, which is as a nature preserve. And a couple of our members did discuss its potential consideration for a permanent place of remembrance. And then, lastly, we also had a suggestion of Lincoln Place Park, which is located at the intersection of Lincoln Avenue and St. John's. I just wanted to shout out that there is an existing piece of public art on this property, so it's Solar Journey, I'm sure you all have seen it. And this parcel is also owned by the Park District. So of the 4 sites that we have here, 3 of them are Park District owned, and the 3rd is owned by Arbor Terrace. 4.
Did we consider any sites on the west side of town?
These were the ones that were most discussed. I don't know, Erin, if you remember Thinking back to that first meeting, whoops.
Excuse me.
Bless you, bless you.
I think one of the issues is because of the size and scope of Miss Nitro, Mayor, that people are having a hard time thinking about where could you put it on the west side of town. And there was also a lot of consideration to have it somewhere on the lakefront, even like raised, such as Central Park. But the same issue, visibility and access, that was people's main concern. So having it just like kind of like a pocket park on the west side was not necessarily advisable or thought of. One of the things we challenged CAB with, and they definitely rose to the occasion, we brought some initial sites that staff had thought about. We asked them, go into your community, think outside the box and look, and then they brought a lot of different things to the table. The ones we see here are ones that, as a group, they said, yes, these make the most sense for us to do a deeper dive on. So I can't remember any specific sites on the west side of town. I don't believe we had any called out on the west side, no.
Okay, because, I mean, if you want to talk about a dearth of public art, I'd say the west side of town is experiencing that significantly, so just food for thought.
I would just add too, one thing that I don't think Amanda mentioned with Brown Park in particular, and I think was a thought process throughout for a lot of members of CAB, was visibility from the Metro train. Because that was something that is already accessible. You can see Miss Nitro, shining out the window from the Metro train right now, and they wanted to preserve that, so people just passing through Highland Park could also enjoy the sculpture.
Well, once again, challenge and say there was a train on the west side of town as well, so, okay.
I will say, when I got caught up on the discussion at our
Yeah, it is.
July meeting, what I heard from a lot of members of CAG, and Jerry, you might want to speak to this too, was that they like the idea of it being still within a business district. Could we find somewhere that has that pedestrian traffic
Gotcha.
baked in?
Okay.
So,
Actually, you're right.
I would
No,
say the
Amtrak is for
footpath.
the west.
I will say that the footpath in Highland Park is heavily trafficked, and maybe not as heavily trafficked as Central Avenue, but pretty heavily trafficked.
You,
Quarry Trail.
I have comments on the finish, but also the siding, and I guess, let me just go to the siding since we're not talking about the finish right
let
now.
me first ask Amanda, are you done, or are you still have more to present? I don't want to keep interrupting. you.
no, I think these are the two policy questions, and then we'll look forward to your direction so we can get you some more informed numbers that can help you make a decision.
Okay, so.
Thank you.
And then Larissa.
Thank you for your presentation. The question I have, and Mayor, is it okay to talk about the finish too, or do you want to?
Absolutely, I
Okay.
believe we're talking about both,
Both,
right?
okay, so-
Those are the
So.
questions.
We can start wherever you like.
The finish, I think it's well worth looking into what the cost would be. It is significantly better with the patina. It just, there's a luster to it, and it comes more alive. It's kind of deadened by the, just that
Madness of the black,
madness of
yeah.
it. I think that's one thing. The other piece is the scale of Miss Nitro, and I'm not really clear whether it's, 50 or 60 feet long in actuality. And I personally would love to see the site plan with, the piece mocked up on the site plan, because I don't know, and I really appreciate.
It's hard to picture it without context
You have
with
to,
the
you have to
actual
be able to see
scale.
how big it is on the site, and,
Right.
and, nobody can do that with just saying that, square footage. Driving by, and I drove by, the two top sites. I drove by the two top sites, Brown Park and Central and Deerfield, and I really appreciate that CAG put all this effort into it, and that I see all the reasons for doing it at Brown Park. It would also be a nice entry to the Central Business District, but they're both good sites. I just would like to see, would it really fit right? Would it,
Right.
it's a very large piece.
Right.
And I don't know that it necessarily fits, but I could be wrong on Brown Park. We need to see just a little drawing of it.
Right.
And to see that
You
there's
need to
enough.
make sure that there's
room-
sufficient
room
setback and
around
that
it.
it's not
Yeah.
just jammed into
It-
this
it-
one.
it-
For all of them.
It really deserves that. Yeah.
Okay.
And we would definitely do that, and I guess, if you could just provide us feedback on any sites, if you're like, absolutely not. I mean, we could, so for example, like the preserve is so great, so do we even wanna look at the preserve? But we would definitely do that as the next step in terms of putting it on the site and then doing more research in terms of cost.
That sounds good. It would have been helpful for this step too, just to have a rough idea.
Yeah, to have the
Yeah.
context. So I have everybody who has raised their hand, so I will call on you in order. I'll jump in with your question. I have no interest in having it at the preserve. I think A, it would get lost, B, that's just not the intent behind the preserve. I think it's supposed to be more natural, and that it's not for us to be parking art, basically.
We
Um,
have
floodplain.
we may as well get rid of it.
Yeah.
Right, all right, I'll take a quick straw poll. Anybody wanna put it at the preserve?
No.
Okay,
That's easy.
all right, so no to the preserve. All right, well, I think it's kind of hard. Brown Park, if it fits, I guess these all have the caveat of, are these appropriate within the context? If it is the right proportionality for the space, would you be interested in having it at Brown Park?
I have a couple caveats with that.
All right, so we'll come back to the caveats. What about at Central Avenue in Deerfield, would you be interested in having it there if it's appropriately sized?
I would.
If it, yeah, I mean,
Gateway piece.
It's very close to the arch too.
Yeah,
No, not really.
No,
The arch is way
way
up,
down.
like another
It's like a
bunch of space.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm seeing a majority are okay with that site?
Or
Yeah,
they
it's-
talk about
And I
it.
just wanted to add a rationale for it.
Okay.
We've been talking about maybe branding us as the city of the arts,
Mm-hmm.
and I think having
A
a
major
Monumental
piece
piece.
Right.
coming in, it kind of reinforces the brand, right? So there's something, whether it's this piece or something else, but why not this piece, right?
Right, right.
Especially because it's
Yeah.
majestic in
Yeah.
its size and everything.
And it's been part of that iconography of the city already.
True, for many decades.
and I think it's gonna fit more easily there, but.
Right, given its different
Well,
measurements.
and that's one of the only ones, we don't know what the park district's gonna say. I mean,
Yeah.
Right.
the preserve and Brown Park, they seem to have a lot of things going on.
Okay, so, I think out of the gate, that kind of gives you some macro direction in terms of siting, in terms of refinishing to its original finish. Raise your hand if you're
Wait,
interested.
Mayor, can we just talk about Brown just a little longer?
I'm gonna come back to it.
Oh,
I'm
you
gonna
are?
come
Okay.
back to individual points. I'm just kind of doing like a macro, 40,000 feet. Would you wanna do the refinishing?
Well,
Yes.
look
Yeah,
at it at least,
Look at it,
prices.
as long as we don't break the bank. Okay,
Yeah.
so in terms of having no sense of size and no sense of cost in a perfect world, I think that's sort of what people wanna do. All right, now let's go through in order. Yumi, you had your hand up first.
I would like to see a rendering of both Brown Park and Central Avenue.
Okay,
That would help a lot.
okay.
Central
Marissa,
Deerfield.
you're next.
Central Deerfield.
Yeah, I would
That's what I meant to
say,
say.
in
Central
my first,
Deerfield.
I liked Brown Park, both seemed good to me, but Brown Park, I like the idea with, like, what we have going on there with families and kids going over there and really getting into the arts, which is why I like Brown Park. That was my first choice, but just, I would like to see more picture as well, but that would
Okay.
be
Okay.
first choice.
Andres?
Yeah, obviously the renderings would be helpful, but it's always helpful. So I would add to Yumi's point that on a regular basis, that could be the default, because it's so hard to just picture it in our imagination. So I do have mixed feelings about Brown Park. I do agree that it could be cool for all the reasons stated and by the CAG. I just worry that it's such a major piece, and there's all this stuff going on in the business district without seeing the rendering, and especially not knowing what the park district is already thinking about doing the rest of Brown Park.
Right.
Like, it's out of context. It's like,
Mhm.
what are they gonna do there? And how would this, so even if we got the rendering with this picture, we don't know what else is gonna be there in the future. And so that makes this discussion very difficult about whether Brown Park would be a good place for it or not.
Okay, thank you. Annette?
So, I have in the past, I was liaison to the Park District, and one of the things that came up is they were talking about a band shell, and actually, Amanda, you included that in your report, and I was really impressed, because that, gave me a little bit of focus. So, to your point, Yumi, I think it would be very helpful to have size renderings and whatever. But it's also, and this is why I brought up the idea of St. John's and Lincoln, that little park there. I'm sorry, I don't recall the name of it. What was that called?
It's Lincoln Place Park.
Okay, it's not a great picture of it, but frankly, the focal point of it right now is a really old picnic table, and that's it. But there is a lovely sculpture there, and nothing would make me happier than to somehow highlight that sculpture and another sculpture. And it is heavily trafficked, because similar, there's more commercial, obviously, at Roger Williams and at Central, but it's right by the path where everybody walks. And it's constantly, it gets a lot of foot traffic there. And it's neighborhoods too, because, people come there, whether it's with their dogs or their kids. It's a small park. So I'm not sure that Brown Park is gonna work, and I think that in a way, in the same way as we're talking, because without knowledge, in terms of cost for the finish, where, by the way, I love the patina, but it's gonna depend on cost. I actually called Gita today and said, excuse me, did you add a zero by mistake? Like, did it go from 40,000 to maintain to 75? But $750,000 is a lot of money. And I don't know where that money's coming from. And we're worried about $2,000 in maintenance, which I think would be a wonderful investment for this town if we were committing to upkeeping our arts and our sculptures. I have no trouble with $2,000 a year, but $750,000 to move and finish one piece, when we're thinking it might be 40, I just don't know.
I don't know where the money's coming
Well, that figure though would incorporate all those additional things that isn't just the conservation piece. That would be like, we need a crane to disassemble it and then.
I understand.
So it's all of those extra things like.
But
the
we're
storage.
not, if it's 40,000 to do the patina, and I'm just saying that we thought that's what it might be. We're still talking about another $700,000. So I just throw that out there, and I'm not making any judgment until we have numbers. But my preference would be, and frankly, even after looking at this site, I think this is a majestic piece. And I love the idea of the gateway. And I think when we started with all the economic development and the Second Street development, how maybe we do an arch and everything else, everybody who comes into Highland Park, if they're going to our business districts, they drive up Deerfield and Central to get there. So it is not as conducive to people actually playing on it and stopping there. But it might become so if people saw how lovely it was, or we put in some benches. But I really love the idea of the gateway and really having it be a presence in Highland Park.
It also shares our public art with the west side,
That's right.
again, because people will be coming back and forth.
Right, I completely agree with that.
Kim is next, and then you.
So I really like the site at Brown Park. I think that for all the reasons mentioned in the report and in the Cultural Arts Advisory Group minutes, I think that's a very good spot. It's accessible easily by foot, public transit, bike, car. It's visible from the metro train. It's also on the McClory Trail.
Yes.
I'd want to see the renderings to make sure that the scale is appropriate. But I think that that's a good site for it. The other sites remains to be seen, I think, with the renderings to see what they look like. We did try when I was the Cultural Arts Advisory Group liaison, when the other arch was chosen and placed in the park at Laurel and Deerfield. And we tried with landscaping and benches to sort of activate that park and get people to come to that park. I've never seen anybody sitting in that park. I've heard from people that they live nearby and they walk by the park, but I've never seen anyone hanging out there. And I know we did a lot with landscaping. Joanne was involved with that as well, with trying to make that more cozy and look better. So I can't imagine that at the intersection of Central and Deerfield that that's gonna be something that people are gonna wanna walk to or bike to or hang out and play on. And I think it is a great piece to have that interaction with, whether it be playing on it or walking through it or under it.
Tony?
I agree with that assessment. You know, in the past, this group has suggested funding various efforts that have felt to be something that would contribute to the vibrancy of Highland Park. I think this would contribute a lot to the vibrancy of Ravinia. I think the work that the advisory group did is very persuasive to me, both because this is within what they do, and because physically, if it fits there, and I suspect it will, it makes a lot of sense to me. Ravinia is striving to expand their activities, their retail district, their connection to Ravinia Festival has always been there and is important, and I think this reinforces that. And I think it reinforces the idea of Highland Park as an arts community. And I'd be willing to spend a significant amount of money to return it to its original luster. And I say that despite the fact that I personally don't care for the piece. It's an important piece. And I feel very strongly about that. It does resonate very strongly with residents, both because it's been here for a long time and artistically it does say something to a large number of people. And yes, kids play on it, and I think that's great too. So I tend to be sort of more disposed to Brown Park.
Okay. Andres and then Yumi.
Yeah, actually, going back to, again, City of the Arts, I think it would make the argument for us to then do the right thing in terms of preserving its original thing. I mean, because if we say City of the Arts, but then we're lowballing its care, right, then, you know, we're not living up to the declaration, so I would add that. My worry, and it's very subjective, but Brown Park is in the middle of an established neighborhood. It has a certain feel to it. And this sculpture will then affect that feel. It will, let's call it an intrusion for now, right? Because it's coming from the outside into something already existing. Over here at Deerfield, at the Gateway, it's not so much a neighborhood feel. It's sort of more an announcement to welcome to Highland Park, where I worry that if it goes to Brown Park without some more neighborhood engagement, because it's their neighborhood, their feel, it feels a certain way that it will change. Now, they might love it, and okay, great, but I think it's dicier. I think it's going to be an interruption. And versus at the Gateway, it's really not an interruption to a neighborhood feel that people have a coziness to it or an attachment to it. And to finish my thought, I think it'd be a more appropriate declaration on the part of the city to make a decision that affects the entrance to the city than a major effect on a particular neighborhood with a particular character.
Okay. I actually wrote down community input. Like, is this something that we put out to the community? This is your sculpture. We've had it here for how many decades? Where would you like to see it, kind of a question. But
Well,
no.
giving
how much-
options, not like.
Not a free-for-all. Yumi?
I'm gonna mention that, just as an aside, but kind of an important one, that most major cities have a percent for art program, where they're dedicating, money because they consider art, really important, public art specifically. And I do still think that we probably have to move the Brown Park, it's a park district, the Brown Park sign, it's kind of in the way. And I'm not at all sure, but I just eyeballed it, that it is gonna fit there, where it feels like there's enough space around it. And then I wanted to mention that, if you go back to the slide with Lincoln, the Lincoln slide, I'm not suggesting putting it there, but the name of Terrence Karpowitz, Terry, as he's known, Terry Karpowitz, his piece is there, you can see it in the background.
Right.
He's a really very noted public sculptor, and his wife is, I think, still head of the Chicago Transit Authority, CTA's public arts program, and he has vast experience with public art and moving public art and installing public art. And I happen to know that he has his own like crane and whatnot for moving, but the point is that we probably would be really smart. I mean, he has an investment here in Highland Park. It's not just there, he has a piece, you know, in front of the Art Center, public sculpture, but it's probably worth checking with him because he's one of the leading experts on creating and installing and moving public art that we have. And there's a sculpture park called the Manilow Sculpture Park. He has a big piece there. But I think the other reason besides his expertise is that he's a very generous fellow. He might be willing to help us at a very low cost, so.
And I think it's important to note, the placement of his sculpture in this park is related to the sun. So it's not like it's just tucked over there, if I remember correctly.
But it's just, it's a resource, and he's a leading
Right.
expert.
It's a wonderful.
Tony?
I had more of a question, sort of building on the idea behind Brown Park. The intersection of Roger Williams and Burton is an open area. It's not used for much. It's not in a neighborhood. It's sort of the heart of the Ravinia Business District. It would be visible to a lot of people a lot of the time and accessible to.
I think that's what
That's
we're
what we're
in Brown
talking
Park.
Oh,
Yeah.
because Brown Park is a specific area. Well then,
Right.
Yeah, Brown Park is the entire stretch of it.
Okay,
We're
okay,
looking
so
at it
then
now.
I'll complete that and say, I understand what Councilmember Tapia is saying about wanting input from the neighborhood, but it's not really a neighborhood. This is not a residential area. This is downtown
Fire
Ravinia. It's
station.
across from the fire station, some
Else
first
building.
floor
Happy
retail
Station.
uses and across the street from other retail uses. I think that's the building that Mr. Claremont erected a number of years ago. And there are some upstairs residential units across from Burton, but really this is not a residential neighborhood, and I don't think it would be an imposition on anybody. Not opposed to getting input to see if there's something we're missing, but it seems sort of a very comfortable place for that to go.
Okay. Annette?
I just want to add to Tony's point. I actually, while I think that is a small business district, I think the Ravinia Neighbors Association would really disagree with your statement. I think they feel like all of it is a residential neighborhood or their neighborhood. And I love that about them. I'm not saying in a critical fashion. I'm just saying I think we would definitely need input from the neighborhood because I think they really feel like very invested in that all the parks and everything. I think that they get a real turnout. I mean, we saw when the fire station opened, it's like it was their fire station, and you know, it's our entire town's. But I think people took a lot of pride in that, and that's wonderful, and I would not want to discourage that. And I would look at it as I know what you're saying in terms of residential, but I think they view that as part of their residential area.
So it sounds like we need more information. Sounds like we want to have renderings to help us understand the proportionality to each of the two sites, at least, that we've talked about. Costs, obviously, are a huge piece of this conversation. And,
So in terms of next steps, I just want to, so I did hear support for Brown Park, Central and Deerfield, and Lincoln Place Park. Is that correct?
Was there for Lincoln?
I don't know if anybody else does.
only in that, I think, had.
If it's only me, then just, I don't want to, cloud the issue, but I just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention.
And I think we
Okay,
need
so
to
just
see the
those two
renderings
sites.
for Brown and for Gateway and Deerfield and Central.
Yeah, so that'll be our next steps, and then, so we'll do the renderings, and then we'll put together,
Can I ask before we do renderings though, I really think we should speak to the park district straight up and, I mean, I think if you call them right now and
Well, we
say
definitely
what
will.
about
We're
the
in-
preserve.
again.
I just don't wanna waste the time on, if it's not a
On
possibility.
Brown Park?
Yeah, I mean,
Well, what
I
we're
like
gonna-
the idea,
Yeah.
depending on what the community says,
But that's an important.
but if they're not gonna do it, it's not our property.
Right, so I think part of the next step of preparing a rendering is to show them that area that is at the corner of Roger Williams and Burton, even if it's in the setback, it's not like they can do a large sculpture there. So even if, for example, they're doing a gazebo, it could tie nicely into an overall redevelopment of that area. But I don't anticipate that they're gonna
Do
build a
programming.
building there or do, so it could tie nicely to what they're doing, and I think showing a rendering of what the sculpture looks like at that corner with the dimensions on site may help inform them of how it could be part of their master
And
plan.
do we know that the gazebo is being considered for there and not all the way down at the other end of Brown Park, which would
Yeah.
make more sense, frankly?
Correct, we don't.
That's a
and
heavy
they-
trafficked area versus a quieter park
Correct.
setting, so.
Right.
Okay.
'Cause
We
that's
wanted
what-
to start with you just to get your preliminary policy feedback, so thank you for that. So we'll follow up with next steps and then come back with further information.
Thanks. I just want to be abundantly clear, $750,000 is an awful lot of money.
Yeah.
And I think that may put a screeching halt to a whole lot of conversation if it ends up.
Well, and the advantage of the Ravinia district is there's money in the TIF fund to pay for the relocation. So that is an
Like
advantage.
$5?
How much? Thank you.
$100,000? What are we talking about?
Well, it's over the life of the TIFs. So there's planned use for that fund in terms of the streetscape. So we can get what the balance is and then we would budget accordingly.
Yeah, again, because if it's 5,000, to the mayor's point, it's one thing, and if it's 500,000, then it's worth
Yeah.
talking about.
Correct.
But to spend it all on one thing, I'm not sure.
Correct. Okay.
All right, thank you. And did you want to say something, Chair?
That's why I came.
I know, I was like, we can't just move
I
on
will,
without hearing from you.
really, Amanda said everything, but it is very important for all of us to understand, and I hope agree, that this piece of sculpture is a very important piece of sculpture by a very important sculptor.
Mhm.
And if we short shrift it more over time, it'll be our loss and our community's loss.
Well said, thank you, appreciate that sentiment. Okay, great. Thank you all, CAD, for joining us. You're welcome to stick around when we talk about parklets and cedaries, but you're also welcome to depart if you
Thank
have
you all, thank you all.
dinner or a better cable package.
So the next presentation pertains to policy feedback that we are looking for regarding streeteries in the community. And so there is a staff report that's included in the packets. Carolyn Hirsch, Business Development Manager, is going to walk through defining streeteries and ask for your policy feedback pertaining to several topics. In terms of next steps, once we have your feedback and if there's support for the program, we will draft a formal policy and then bring it back to a city council meeting for formal consideration. Our recommendation is that if there is support for these, that we move forward administratively in terms of permits, in terms of best working with the businesses, and as long as there certainly meets the policy provisions that we're gonna talk about momentarily.
Great. Welcome, Carolyn.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Staff is seeking feedback on whether there's interest in the year-round use of public parking spaces for streeteries, and if there is, the maximum number of parking spaces, whether to limit locations or permitted citywide, and the fee structure. A streetery is an outdoor dining area created in a public parking space on the street or on a sidewalk, bump out, and an extension of sidewalk cafes, often combined with parklets. That they typically feature lighting, radiant heat, and some protection from the weather. A parklet is a sidewalk extension that provides more space and amenities for the public. It is usually a raised deck installed in parking spaces, extending from the sidewalk to the width of the adjacent parking space, and would be ADA accessible. There's other ways to do it too, but it would be ADA accessible because it meets the curb. Streeteries are self-contained with furniture. Equipment is stored within the structure, and they offer a unique opportunity to enhance the local dining scene and foster vibrant community spaces, and they are commonly found throughout the United States and Europe. Currently, we have 2 restaurants utilizing parking spaces in the public right-of-way for outdoor dining, with 1 additional restaurant proposing to join. These businesses are not requesting seasonal streeteries, as the structures are costly. They can be close to $100,000, and short-term use and out-of-season storage costs limit the impact on revenue and defeat their purpose. Instead, they seek to establish year-round streeteries, providing patrons with consistent and reliable outdoor dining experience, maximizing their potential income and enhancing their business operations. Although not a precedent, the city has permanently removed parking spaces on 2nd Street and built sidewalk bump outs to expand the outdoor dining area, establishing support for restaurant expansion by eliminating parking spaces. By allowing a combination of a streetery and parklet, the businesses can provide additional space for year-round dining with protection from the elements and increase their revenue. This approach does not permanently remove parking spaces and is more cost-effective alternative to the city installing concrete bump outs. And if this business relocates or closes or the use changes, the parking spaces can be easily converted to on-street parking. Streeteries create lively business districts, increase business revenue, and expand a business's footprint without major construction costs or needing to relocate. While streeteries can contribute to the area's vibrancy, a balanced approach is necessary to ensure the needs of all stakeholders, including businesses, residents, and visitors, are met. The police department expressed concern about safety. As is the case with our current outdoor dining in the street, streetery structures are not crash rated, so there is a risk. ADA regulations would be met, as businesses must maintain a 5-foot walkway at all times. Another concern is that converting parking spaces into streeteries will reduce available parking, adversely impact other businesses, and reduce residents' convenience. In addition, some of the businesses interested in a streetery are not open for breakfast or lunch, so the streetery may sit unoccupied during daytime business hours when parking is at a premium. Currently, the city allows a maximum of 3 parking spaces dedicated to outdoor dining, and the city also allows co-owned businesses to share space in the right-of-way. So we're also seeking to understand whether the council wants to limit the number of parking spaces equal to the frontage of a business, allow carry-out restaurants to offer streetery dining in the right-of-way, offer it citywide, or restrict it to the central business district where parking is less of a premium because there are parking decks, garages, and surface lots. The Ravinia district is smaller and there's less parking, which is a concern because we are seeing a number of new restaurants coming to the district. And also service businesses in the district have asked if they can reserve 3 parking spaces for their business as well. In addition, residents have also, who are also business owners, have expressed concern that businesses are expanding their footprint without appropriately paying for the additional square footage, which, if we did have a program, would allow us to do that. Lastly, we'd like to know if the council wants to allow streeteries on private property, for example, in Crossroads Shopping Center, subject to review. In terms of fee structure, options include an annual or monthly flat rate, regardless of size or location, between $1,500 to $3,500 annually. And this would not include the one-time building permit or design review fees. A per square foot fee, for frame of reference, a standard parallel parking space is 200 feet. An angled space is 288 square feet. 3 spaces would be 600. Parallel would be 864 square feet. Based on Glencoe's current fee for Guildhall's streetery, the monthly fee for 3 spaces would be $318 a month or $3,816 annually. A tiered fee, which is a fee based on square footage and location. For example, a higher fee where parking spaces are a premium, such as in the Ravinia district. And then lastly, does council want to exempt streeteries from outdoor dining license fees? but require an annual streetery right-of-way special license agreement. Again, the fee range would be between $1,500 and $3,500. For comparison, our competitive communities' fees range from $150 to $3,500.
150 or 150?
$150 to $3,500. Ours is $150 right now, so it's not a streetery cost, but it's a fee.
$150 to $3,500 for outdoor dining fee or for street?
The outdoor dining fee is $150 regardless of the number of parking spaces.
Okay.
But the range is from is our $150 versus $3,500, generally being the max from other
So the
communities.
$3,500 is a streetery, and the
Yes,
$150
correct.
is just outdoor dining?
Yes,
and tables
correct.
on the sidewalk kind of thing?
Yes,
Okay.
sorry. Right, so I had said earlier that it was $1,500 to $3,500 for a streetery.
I'm watching both of you.
Yeah, no, I'm not following.
So it's two different things. I think the $150
It's
is
for the outdoor dining.
Tables,
outdoor dining.
right.
15.
Just one license fee, 150.
Correct.
It's flat, temporary, it's seasonal.
Okay, and then the streetery would be,
$3,500.
100 to
Yeah, to
$3,500.
$3,500.
okay.
Because it's year-round, and it's a build-out, and it's
And it's
permanent,
permanent.
and it doesn't get taken down. And they're storing stuff even when
Inside.
inside.
Right.
So they're using it full time.
And if I could add, and I'm not reviewing anything that's not public information, as the attorney for Glencoe, I would not use the Guildhall and Glencoe experience as an example. That number and that whole experience has been the result of a lot of discussion and a compromise, and it's now, the license is ending, and that streetery is required to be dismantled, so that the village could reevaluate the entire program. So I just wouldn't rely on it as precedent or example.
Thank you.
When is that being done?
It's got one more.
It's by 25.
End of 2025.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then again, in terms of next steps, if the council supports streeteries, staff will draft a policy to share with businesses for feedback. And the policy can be presented to the Business and Economic Development Advisory Group for their feedback as well. And then thereafter the draft will be presented to the City Council for formal consideration. And the policy would include, but not be limited to, design standards, process, special license agreement, and we anticipate the program would debut in 2025. And businesses interested will be encouraged to begin working on their design plan and site plan now later in the winter, so it can be operational next spring.
Great. Thank you.
Questions?
Andres.
Yeah, I just venture more than, I don't have a question, I have a comment. I support this. I think that major cities like Chicago, New York City, and others have been doing this. Mid-tier cities like Indianapolis and Grand Rapids are doing this. You know, Highwood is doing it, and it's very vibrant. And we ourselves have been moving in this direction. I mean, we've been allowing parking spaces in different places to be taken. This would be just, in my mind, a kind of a natural extension, making it more permanent, more all seasonal or all 3 seasons, and why not, right? And so I'm in favor of it. The issue of safety, I hear the police bring that up, but I would be interested in knowing, well, do we have any recorded problems? Like, since we have Glencoe and we have Highwood, especially because there's a lot of traffic when there's a lot of streeteries there, have there been problems with safety or not, rather as opposed to a speculative thing? Is there an actual evidence of it being a safety issue?
I can address just real quickly. We have any incidents specific to eateries or this type of setting where we have had cars go through windows into businesses, so you
Right.
can imply that if there had been that kind of setup there, then we could impact it. So we have had those, so that's our real world experience, but we haven't had anything specific to the eatery or that situation.
The concern is if it happens once, people are gonna say, what measures did you have in place?
How did you take precautions? I'm gonna jump in, and I know everybody's got their hands up. So I just came back from the Mayor's Institute for City Design, which is put on by the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the National Endowment for the Arts. And so I'm gonna report back to all of you. I brought the question of Port Clinton versus the lot, and got the input of subject matter experts from around the country and other mayors, and it was a really great experience. But what I also took away from that conversation was that it's important as you're looking at communities and community planning and improving vibrancy to view streets as places where cars are guests. And I'll show you a picture that kind of shows you how much space we give to cars. Like if you dug out what cars get, this is how much you're giving to pedestrians, people crossing the street, right? Like there's so much space that is being used by cars versus bikes, people walking, businesses, parks, and so forth. So I know in the past, I've had a very strong feeling about using public land to help businesses, especially if they were storing stuff on there and not using it for business purposes. But now I'm convinced that this is really an opportunity for us to take back some of that real space and use it for community vibrancy and for helping our businesses. If you look at the National Association of City Transportation Officials discussion about parklets, they have critical, recommended, and optional pieces that they want people to look at for design purposes. But their number one critical is to ensure visibility to moving traffic and parking cars. Parklets must be buffered using a wheel stop at a desired distance of 4 feet from the parklet. So essentially having that much space between where a car is physically stopped and where patrons are sitting and enjoying a meal. So I'm sure we have all of this, and I'm sure you've looked at this, but I'm happy to forward it on to you. And they talk about, you know, the use of bollards and planters and so forth, so it still looks beautiful. But I think there's a real opportunity for us to spruce up, I think, throughout our community. I would be fine with doing this on private land at Crossroads. I think there's a real opportunity over there. And I think that on Central, there are some places where it makes sense. They highly recommend that you look at this in areas where the sidewalks are narrow. So even though we've done great work on the east side of Second, maybe there are a couple of spots along on the west side that would also benefit from this. So I am strong, I'm now a proponent. And appreciate the time that's gone into putting this together. Okay, on my list, I have Kim, then Tony, then Annette, Kim, and then Marissa. Thank you. So Kim,
Put me on the list.
and Yumi.
I love streeteries. I think that for all the reasons that you mentioned, I think giving more space to humans than cars, and providing that sense of community and that vibrancy is a great idea. We do need to look at where we can do it in a reasonable way. We need to figure out what the fees are, given what Corporation Council has just told us about Glencoe. I think we need to get a little more information on that discussion and what their concerns are with the existing program, what changes they might make so that we can at least learn from their experience.
And Mayor, if I may, I didn't mean to set the conversation, I just said, don't rely on the fee amount, because it's being reevaluated and the program's being reevaluated. That particular construction was done during COVID.
Right.
And not in a permanent way, but it was allowed to be more permanent. And so it wasn't done pursuant to any program, and that's the
Right.
concern.
And I was relying on that fee because I thought that sounded like a fairly reasonable fee, although it is a large area that they've got, and they are tight on parking in that lot too.
Right.
But it seemed like a worthwhile trade-off to have kind of a reasonable fee, let them put the structure in, use the parking for it. I do think that we need to be careful in terms of our grants, because we are having, these business grants now. Make sure, we're sort of subsidizing the business by allowing them to use the public parking space for the streeteries, so I don't know if we want to also be providing grants for the streeteries. So that's maybe
Right,
another.
making sure that it's balanced in terms of people's locations and helping others who may not have those options in front of their
Right.
spots.
And as it stands, streeteries are allowed in the exterior grant right now.
Ah, okay. All right, Tony.
I like the program. I think anything that moves us more towards a pedestrian-friendly downtown is the direction I'd like to see us go. We can't ignore the fact, however, that people get to Highland Park in a car. Some people in Highland Park get to downtown in a car. And we ought to think about, as we begin to impose pedestrian and retail use in our parking spaces, think about moving available parking into the perimeter of downtown. I've been in various Western European cities this past summer and in past years. A lot of larger cities are much more walkable. Yes, there are a lot of cars, but they also have narrower streets, so access for cars is somewhat limited. But many larger European communities have parking lots and parking access around their perimeter that doesn't directly interfere with walking and getting around downtown on foot. I would like to see more of that, and whatever we can do to support that. You know, we talk about people accessing our businesses. One business that's successful may contribute to the access and interest in surrounding businesses, not if you leave the business to get into your car. So if you leave a store on foot and you go somewhere else on foot, there's a greater chance you're gonna go in somewhere else and avail yourself of another wonderful business or restaurant in Highland Park. So I think it's a great idea. I have one question that does not impact on my favoring this in every way. I'm unclear, is this principally a 3-season use or all season?
All seasons.
Because I see comments about the importance that this has had during the summer for various restaurants. I can't imagine sitting outside in a snowstorm, but if people are willing to do that, I'm willing to give them a chance.
Well, they typically have heat, you know, radiant heat and,
Okay.
you know, some sidewalls.
Minos is great.
That's great. I mean, I don't
I'm
run,
always cold.
you know, whatever a business feels is likely to be successful given the opportunity.
Mayor, if I could, so when elected officials are providing your feedback, if maybe you could also just opine on some of these policy questions. So for example, right now, we limit the outdoor dining to a restaurant frontage and we exclude carryout. There are some businesses though.
We don't
Or we
exclude,
don't,
we
we
don't
don't.
exclude
Yeah, I'm
carryout
sorry, we
right
don't
now. For
exclude
example, Ravinia Brewing and BWB
BWB.
share
Right.
outdoor
And
dining.
BWB
Correct,
is
right.
carrier.
So, but that is a policy question. So for example, what we require right now is that they, you know, they have to get notification and approval from the owner and so forth. So if we're looking at a permanent structure, do we want to exclude carry-out restaurants based on the size? So, maximum number of parking spaces, and then also, do we wanna make this, again, I think what I did here is support for community-wide, even though there is limited parking, but just wanna make sure the council supports that as well.
If I may, since I'm just finishing up, I would say that I would exclude carryout. In terms of the maximum number of parking spaces, I think the way we limit it right now is what's in front of the business. I would be very reluctant to go beyond that unless, well, I'd be reluctant to go beyond that. We've talked about getting the permission from adjacent businesses. That's a nice idea, but I'm not sure of what the pressures are like for those businesses if they're not also availing themselves of outdoor use. It is imposing on their parking access. Until we provide some sort of coherent peripheral parking, I'd be a little uncomfortable granting too much more space.
And I guess one question I have is, if you have a space where you have, for example, Madame Zuzu's, Lou Malnati's, which is carry-out only,
Mhm.
Once Upon a Bagel, can they share one, and how is that, and who, like, is that something that's been considered?
We have not spoken with them, there hasn't been interest yet.
Uh-huh.
Lou Malnati's is carry-out only, as you
Right.
know.
Right, that's what I'm
Um,
wondering, if you could combine them.
They certainly, because Once Upon a Bagel and Madame Zuzu's are right next to each other, it's conceivable that they could do it if they wanted to,
Right, okay.
absolutely.
throwing that
But,
out there.
you know, how they would share that cost and the structure, and all, I don't know how they would do that.
Okay. I actually have 4 people ahead of you. Annette, you're next.
So, I love this idea because I think it really goes hand in hand with what the programs you've been building this past year in terms of vibrancy, economic incentives, and encouraging businesses to do a facelift, okay, for lack of a better way of putting it, and we're just taking it outside. And if anything, one of the few complaints I've heard about the program is we can't spend that much money outside. How do we do it? And in my mind, this is the perfect way to just give them the option. And I don't know how many will take advantage of it, but I believe it should be the frontage. Tony, to your point, I agree with that. I believe it should be open to any businesses. I don't think it should be limited to downtown. I do think it's incumbent upon staff, PDC, and this group to come up with the kind of guidelines that we could say, you know, this street is just too narrow, it doesn't work. Or the street would be only work if it was a bump out. But this is such a cost-saving measure. We just saw what we spent on Second Street. We see how it took all those businesses, you know, all summer, what a price they paid. And I think that this is like such a perfect way of letting them continue their businesses indoor, but if they want to build outdoor, just on that one little spot, it doesn't take everybody else out. I'm not sure, Tony, how I feel about carry out. In a sense, just by way of example, I think the fact that you've got WB and Ravinia sharing, to your point, Mayor, I don't know if Once Upon would want to share with Lou Malnati's, but maybe that, you know, enhances it because they're open later and the other one closes, and that way it's used all the time.
One opens at 4, one opens at 7 in the
And
morning.
one closes at 4.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So it almost works hand in hand. So I'm in favor of the number of spaces. I'm in favor of definitely doing the incentives for the plans. I would caution us only, I don't want the fees to be so high that we're viewed as giving with one hand and taking back with the other. I think 150 is way too low, so I'm not advocating for that. But I think that if we price it out, the businesses will not have a lot of traffic, to your point, for winter dinners, okay? But they may do it in fall, and they may do it in spring. And frankly, during COVID, we did do a lot of stuff in winter, having dinners. But that was more out of desperation than anything else. And I would love to encourage them to do so. And the only way I can see doing that is through making the fees affordable. But also, you know, I think Councilmember Blumberg has brought this up many times, and I've always struggled with it, that we don't want people just to get a free footprint, extra footage.
Right.
And I think to your point, we should charge a a fee that does make it feel like they're paying to use those spaces. But on the other hand, I don't want to make it so exorbitant that we discourage them from doing it, and then we are accused of, instead of encouraging this program, you know, taking it away on the other side.
So
And
the
there's a
national-
lot of
sorry.
examples, by the way, in North America, not just in
Right.
this area,
Exactly.
of fees. And we did look at them.
Right.
We didn't go deep into them because we wanted to get feedback from you now, so.
Well, I
we
can
do
say
have a
that
lot of
looking at the
examples.
stuff that you presented, which I thought was excellent, by the way, I think staff really did do a deep dive into this. 10,000 is too high, okay? I saw that, I was like, forget it, I'm not in favor of this program. But the 15 to 3,500 or maybe the 2,500 is the sweet spot for the first year, and we see how many people take advantage of the incentives, and we kind of balance it out. But I can tell you right now, that would be way too high in my measurement. On the other hand, 150 is way too little.
Right.
So, you know, I like the 1,500 to 3,500 range, because I think you're giving us what others are doing, and you're also valuing the fact that these people are using additional public property at this point.
So back to the National Association of City Transportation Officials, they look at between 1,000 and 2,000 for the fees.
That's good.
They also recommend, though, that they be taken out in areas that have snow. That you build them out of materials that, and we've all picked, you can picture it in your head, and if you can't, we can get you the information, but it's, you know, there are specific materials that can be placed and then removed fairly easily, so that the snowplows are able to do their work and not crash into
And
these.
one other point, several restaurants during COVID invested in the fire pits.
Mhm.
And while I think in a streetery, which is more enclosed, more like a sukkah, that's probably not a great idea. But I do think if you take out several of the tables or whatever and had less seating, you might still be able to put in, whether it's a heat lamp or
Right,
some
radiant
sort of-
heat just heats the body, it doesn't heat the material.
Yeah,
Right,
yeah.
so,
So thank you, does that end?
yeah, Marissa?
I am also in favor of streeteries. I think it's a great addition, and it will make more people come out and eat and, you know, all season. I'm also looking at the lens of families I could see eating outside with my kids and not disturbing the diners inside. And that's what I always think of. I think community-wide, it should be community-wide at least offered to all the different parts of Highland Park, and limited to the frontage of the restaurant as well. In terms of the fee, what was proposed, I mean, that seems right, but as Annette had mentioned, not 150, I think we should go up higher than that. I think is a great idea, and to use all this extra space, especially with the beautiful new part of downtown Highland Park, so I'm all in favor of it.
Great.
Yeah.
Yumi?
I'm next. Thank you, Mayor. I also, this won't be a surprise to you or Dita. I support this because I've written to you about this. I am also gonna just say I'm aware of great restaurants who are actively being courted by other cities, and I don't wanna lose our best restaurants. I am a native, originally a New Yorker, native New Yorker, although I've been an Illinoisan for decades now, and very familiar with New York City's street urbies galore on the busiest and narrow streets. I mean, they're all over, and it actually, I think, impacts traffic way more in New York City than it would us. And I personally, I guess I'm not ready to exclude carry out. I mean, I think of Michael's Red Hots that, every people dining outside all the time there.
They do have a full restaurant, you would call
Yes,
it. Okay.
they do, they
Okay.
do. But I'm not ready to do that.
You would like to have this be available to people who are doing carry out?
I'd like to study that a little bit more. I
Okay,
haven't considered it
okay.
before this meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, I did see what council member Lidauer was referring to. It was a $10,000 fee, which I just thought, I mean, restaurants are already struggling, even some of our more successful ones. I can't imagine charging that. I do want to emphasize, I strongly believe we need really good, I'd like some good design standards. There are certainly loads of examples, and I think some of the ones that you just showed, are nicer than what we have. While I don't want to call out a restaurant, I love this restaurant in Highland Park, but it was using water jugs, which are now covered. But in any event, they're covered now, and it looks fine. But for the design standards are really, really important. And I did talk to I did talk to a few non-restaurant retailers on Central who talked about, well, they talked about parking, but they also said, honestly, I guess I don't want to, there's one restaurant in particular that could, in theory, move to Highwood, and the reaction from the stores that I spoke to said, oh my God, no. Let's do whatever it takes to keep them here. And one, I thought, raised a really interesting point about all the parking that we have, the lots on Central, Port Clinton Square, that we, and I think we've talked about this. I know I've talked to you about this. Better signage. There needs to be better education about how accessible parking is.
The entire length of the train tracks, that was referred to as the parking spine. So where we had the lot is the parking lot, and beyond, there's parking all over the place.
And just that there is plenty of available parking under Port Clinton, that easy to get into the street level. And I want to make sure I don't lose any piece. One retailer store, clothes store actually, said the city was willing to pay a large amount of incentive grants to get restaurants to pay them to open here, why wouldn't we help a great restaurant or
Stay.
to stay here?
Great point.
And this came from a clothes store, by the way. I think that, for the pricing, I'd like it to be really competitive with, city manager, I just wanna make sure that you're hearing as well, that I would like it to be competitive, I don't wanna be losing out because, another city is offering it for far less money.
Right.
And I think that was it for me. I think that is, I'm scrolling through.
As we're approaching 7,
Yes,
I'm gonna
I'm
ask.
done.
Because
I'm done.
Kim had her hand
Yeah.
up, Andres has his hand up. If we could kind of
Sure.
cut to the chase.
I'm gonna go real fast because I didn't answer these questions before. So
Okay.
design standards, yes, absolutely. Limit to the restaurant's frontage, yes. Not sure about carry-out restaurants. If someone's carrying out, they're carrying out and taking it home, or they can take it to a park or something.
That
if
is
they're
the
not-
business model that's carried out.
Yeah, because they're, if they're providing a streetery for carry-out service, and Michael's is different because they do have a space to sit and dine inside. You're gonna have a lot of trash, I think, and it's not gonna be kept up
They're gonna
properly
put the
because you're
money-
not gonna have staff.
Right, the self-serve does have more trash.
Yeah,
Right,
so I'd
definitely.
be concerned about that.
Okay.
Maybe we should remove if co-owned nearby businesses could share, because we.
Even if
just-
they're not co-owned.
Yeah, we just
we'd like to-
discussed that, yeah, if they're not co-owned and they're open different times of day, that would be
Yeah,
great.
if nearby,
great
that's
shared
good,
use.
it's good.
And, yeah, I would try and do it community-wide if we can, but we need to get more detail.
Okay, thank you. Andres?
Yeah, I'm gonna do the same thing as Kim, just the checklist. I would not wanna pile on fees, let's just be reasonable. And if it's one, it should be one fee, not 2 fees, because that just kinda adds. I would say any business, not just downtown, that would meet the whatever qualifications. I would be okay with the incentives being used to build a streetery. I'm okay with a co-owned thing if the businesses agree. I would in favor of design standards for sure. I have mixed feelings about carryout, because carryout really actually needs a 15-minute parking. I would worry that there'd be a streetery there and you kind of, you take away the very convenience of a carryout that, because you want to go in and out. So, and the other thing about adjacent businesses that give permission, I like the neighborly part of it, like if the business says yes, it's fine. My worry is, well, that business might not be there, in a year or two. And so what if there's a new business that comes in and it's in their way for whatever reason, to have a streetery and they say, well, why is there a streetery here? So that might set us up for some difficult things, a nice arrangement ahead of time that the new tenant might really not want.
And again, to the sort of temporariness of the materials, it's literally, where I've
that's a good
seen it,
point.
things
Yeah,
that
yeah.
can be
Taken out.
clicked
that's
together
true.
and then
Okay.
pulled up pretty quickly.
Then I
Yeah.
remove that concern.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you. So Carolyn, do you feel like you've got good sense
Yes,
from us of where
I
we
do.
are?
Thank you.
Great, wonderful. Thanks for the great presentation, great materials. Okay, so is it, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
from October 15th, we need to approve closed session minutes?
Right, they're not available for the public to see, but
Because
they
they're closed
are
session.
included in the packet for the council.
So I'm seeking a motion to
So
approve
moved.
those closed session
Second.
minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, thank you. And we are coming back for closed session, or that'll be part of the city
you
council?
could adjourn this.
Seeking a motion to adjourn
So
the
moved.
please.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Great, thanks. Great discussions, everybody.